Okay, here we are at IFX in Las Vegas, in downtown Las Vegas, really in the shadows of reInvent, but it's a nice, bright, sunny day here. Yesterday was pouring rain. We've been inside a container for 2 days. It is immutable, so
Yeah.
no, it's mutable. No, is it immutable or is it mutable? I don't know.
The container does not appear to be mutable. I mean, it's steel, and we're not going to move it.
Yeah, we're not. Yeah,
I didn't see any cranes outside, so.
So, any case, I wanted to introduce you both, and first, I'd like to introduce Andrew Tunnel, who's a GM, serverless and emerging cloud services at New Relic. Thank you for joining us.
Absolutely.
And thanks for sponsoring this podcast from the New Relic is making possible. And Erica Windish, principal engineer at New Relic. Hey, Erica.
Hi.
Good to see you again.
Good to see you again.
I last saw you at a New Relic event, and little did I know, if 2 weeks later, there was the news about the company getting acquired. That was exciting. That's exciting to see.
Yeah.
But Erica and I first, I think, met at OpenStack. Maybe it was 2014, and I did a little event about we called it, I forget what we called it. We called it like something like it was basically an evening meetup, and you were still working at Docker, and we were talking about containers entering the OpenStack ecosystem.
Yes.
And how things have changed. And
Mm-hmm.
Andrew, you worked at Amazon Web Services before joining New Relic. So I'd first like to just talk about what are your own reflections on Lambda. And you both have worked quite deeply, with the Lambda architecture. And I'm curious about your perspectives on the past 2 years and how do you see it now? And what are some of the, noteworthy aspects of it today that reflect on, the roots of these serverless type technologies? Now, I wanted to ask you both about Lambda because you both have been working in this space for a while. You, Andrew, you came from AWS. Erica with IOPipe, the company that she started, was working deeply in the Lambda architecture. And so, where is it today? What is realized about Lambda today? What is it that's what's that perspective that you get today that reflects on kind of when you first actually started using the technology, and when was that? I would be curious.
Well, so when I first started using it was 4 years ago. You mentioned when we first met, which was back maybe 2013 to 2014. I was at Docker, was just starting out. You were just starting out the new stack. I remember your launch party.
Yeah.
And it's been a journey. But I left Docker. I started working on serverless applications. Started IOPipe. And in the beginning, we had to explain to people what serverless was, right? And now we see, massive, huge scale applications that are running on Lambda. Both our customers running these workloads, as well as running those workloads ourselves. I was giving a talk at Serverless Conf about ingesting billions of events per month, right? And this is like an architecture I had put together that could, scale massively on Lambda, right? That we were running in production, and the use cases have matured, but they're also building of distributed applications, right? Which is challenging and hard. So I think that more people are running into these harder things, these harder use cases, more complex architectures, right? And it's not because serverless is hard. It's because people are at the maturity level that they can build, that they're building complex applications in serverless rather than in containers.
So when I was at Amazon, we became instant fans of Lambda 6-ish months after it started in Edge, where I worked. It's the CloudFront organization. We work a lot with media and entertainment customers. You can imagine that's an environment where you have a lot of event-driven type activity, right? It's not like you don't get a steady cadence of people dropping a new movie or television show, right? And especially since the new media services exist there, there's a lot of opportunity for customers like that to start driving activities asynchronously based on something that happened. Maybe somebody put an object in an S3 bucket. Now you're going to go analyze that video, determine whether it meets your criteria of something that you can transcode, and then use one of the AWS services to do it. Right? It allows you to stitch these workflows together. So we started using it a lot to demonstrate how AWS customers could be successful building on AWS in the org I worked in. Since I've left, though, I mean, I'll say, like, we look at a lot of customers, and I think early on, a lot of customers saw this event-driven architecture and thought, hey, I can, instead of having a server that has a cron job that just wakes up and goes and does some orchestration activities within my ecosystem, I can actually use CloudWatch events and its cron capabilities to trigger a Lambda function that can do some analysis and then do some orchestration work. And we still see customers who do that. But more and more and more, we're seeing customers who are building their entire entire platform on Lambda. And one of our customers, Morningstar, which, financial services company, pretty well-known brand, rebuilt their entire website on it. And I mean, they use New Relic to check that out. I think since the IOPipe acquisition, they're happier than ever with the pace of new stuff we've delivered in the past month since the acquisition closed has been stellar. But the reason companies are starting to do that is because of a lot of the evolution that the services itself made. They have the same SLA as EC2 now. They this week launched support for something called provision concurrency, which allows you to essentially defeat cold starts by assigning a number of warm invocations that can happen at any moment. I think last night they announced a beta for RDS connection pooling. So if you're using relational databases, you can now basically create connection pools. And when a cold start happens, or when you need to make a new database connection, you don't suffer the latency penalty. So you're seeing they're not taking the old solutions and trying to dump them into it. They're trying to solve that problem, maybe through different ways. But it's giving you, it's making it so you don't have to make a technology choice based on certain trade-offs that might be negative. Instead, you're making the technology choice based on the technology that's right for your workload.
Right. So Lambda Destinations, has become kind of a try-catch for the cloud, where you say, my code runs, and if it has an exception, do this, and if it doesn't have an exception, you can also do this other thing. The destinations and the other features that we're seeing, such as the RDS connection pools, we're enabling new patterns to be built on top of Lambda, but also like taking that complexity I was describing earlier and reducing it, right? So, and doing things that before with containers were just impossible, right? And turning that from impossible to complex to easy. The Step Functions Express was the other thing I was thinking of.
Okay, and that's actually a good transition to the acquisition itself of IOPipe. And
Sure.
And I was just reading back on the website, and I think what that last announcement you cite is testament to your focus at IOPipe in creating that simplicity, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And like providing kind of that capability to eliminate risk for developers.
Yeah.
Right. So tell us a little bit more about IOPipe, Erica, and then we
Yeah.
can talk about the acquisition perhaps.
Yeah. IOPipe was a tool. It's not quite yet shut down. It'll be very shortly. But IOPipe was a tool for developers to you would instrument your code. You would add our wrapper, which eventually we offered through Lambda Layer, so you could just auto-instrument your code. We would collect like traces and spans, metrics data, logging data, profiling data, context and metadata around the events that are coming in. So if you had data coming from API Gateway or another service, even things like AWS Connect, some of these more obscure services we supported, understanding all of their event type payloads, so we could then correlate that with things like spans. And of course, now we're part of New Relic and have been working on, have already brought over some of the assets into New Relic, such as layers and the CLI tool for onboarding and getting your code instrumented without modifying any of the actual code.
So what were the gaps that IOPipe really can help fill?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'll just say, so the first time I met Erica, I was incredibly impressed with her focus and ability to really understand the space around making it easy for developers to effectively deliver code. And I think if you look at New Relic is like an observability platform. That's not something that we want customers to be doing after the fact, right? We don't want them throwing it over the wall to the tools person who then has to figure out how to go instrument Erica's application, because she's going to be operating it and she's going to be ostensibly using the platform to understand the behavior of her functions of her serverless application. And so the attention to detail, and I think you see this in some of the recent things we did around layers, the CLI, et cetera, and attention to developer productivity was just stood out. They also, as Erica touched, they had some, I think, just technology that was built because they know the space. So, obviously I had been working extensively with Lambda functions, but having a specialist company that had been focused on the space essentially since, you and Adam had been working on in the space-ish since shortly after the Lambda launch. And building a company, they were really the first company focused on monitoring and observability around
Right.
it. It's not easy to go replace 4 years of knowledge about like the underlying ecosystem.
Right.
And I'll say the engineering team as a whole, very experienced on AWS. So, between the clear things that we saw that were some product, I won't say gaps, we were gonna build them, but there were opportunities for us to do sooner rather than later and just bring a great injection of talent. And I'll say a lot of hunger and willingness to go the extra mile on behalf of our customers. That customer centricity was a win all around.
Okay, great. So the monitoring capabilities that came with IOPipe seem like they're still incredibly important. In terms of as serverless gets adopted more and more, as you talk about those complex use cases.
Yeah.
And one of the notes I came away with from the New Relic event in New York a few months ago, came with this declaration about observability.
Yeah.
And I'm curious on how you both relate this concept of observability to serverless architectures.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things. First of all, most of our customers aren't building brand new greenfield serverless applications. They have very heterogeneous software architectures, right? So they may start refactoring a legacy monolith using serverless, but it may talk into the core legacy application that still exists. So I think the first tenet there is when you do things like tracing, you have to have coverage, right? And if you look at New Relic as a platform, we have 12 years building coverage across virtually every language and application framework that customers might use. Adding serverless to that umbrella, as we see that as a growth area, is a natural extension. The data type that is tracing propagated through that entire thing gives you full stack visibility. We also have a product portfolio that allows you to get visibility vertically as well. So it's not just the breadth across application development choices. It's also if you're working on that legacy monolith and it runs on an EC2 cluster, we have excellent metric data and underlying event data about what's happening on your hosts. So I think as I look at it, and serverless is actually unique because it's our serverless solution, just like IOPipes, is a very high cardinality solution. It allows you to slice and dice data in a way. I think over the long, as we get more and more data comes from applications that are on the internet, it's going to become more and more important that we have really granular, high cardinality visibility at the time horizon I care about, and then the visibility I need for things like trend analysis and retrospective type of analysis on my data. So I think as it relates to serverless, you see it because as the entity types get it's like entity explosion, right? You go from what used to be a monolithic app sitting on one or two hosts to now what might be 52 Lambda functions, 10 Dynamo tables, a couple API gateways, a whole host of IAM policies, right? How do you have the data and relationships at your fingertips, and how do you tell the story arc within a tool set so that I can quickly get to the answer?
So my perspective is I feel that IOPipe was one of the earliest, pure, modern observability products. We were doing this, what we call whole event observability, which was basically highly granular data. We were collecting, all these traces and these spans, and we were collecting the metrics and custom metrics, structured logs, all of these things together, as a single document, for every invocation. And the great thing about serverless was that, or it still is that each invocation is decoupled from the other invocations, and in theory from the process that runs it itself, right? Each of these is kind of its own little black box. And that was really important for us because it meant that like any spans that are generated during that period, in theory, belong to this Lambda, right? There's a lot of really just interesting play there with the fact that just it's very clear what request is being handled. It's very event driven, right? Like serverless is all event driven, and I think that on like traditional monitoring, like servers, like you have things that are long lived and things that are short lived, and like let's say if you did like say try to run Knative on top of Kubernetes, on top of EC2, on top obviously on top of AWS, right? Now you have this stack of things, and as the stack gets to the bottom, it gets wider and longer lived, right? And as we go up that stack, those things are shorter lived. And with serverless, they're the shortest of all the things that are living, right, in your infrastructure stack. And I think that just has it has consequences on how you monitor, observe, and operate those applications. Because I think that operating something that's long lived and says like, well, I can't lose this host, or I can't But no, like we started building these cloud native applications where maybe we don't care if a host goes away, but now we care that the data center goes away, right? Like we still care that those things underneath, whether or not they go away. It's just we de-risk by making them very big and making them very expensive. Like AWS data centers are not cheap, but they're also not my personal problem.
Right.
I'll also just kind of add on to that to say, if you think about the problems we have aren't new, right? Like, if I built a mobile app 10 years ago, 5-6 years ago, I still might figure out the fact that the black box is actually the last mile to a customer's phone. Right? Like the internet connectivity dropped.
Right.
It was just simpler to do that because there were fewer steps between when an outbound request went there.
Right.
And so if you think about serverless, all of the things I have and the increased number of black boxes where I don't have the traditional tools that I've had necessitate that you have more data points surrounding it so that you can intuit what's happening inside the box. And think about DynamoDB is a great example. There's the notion of hotkeys within Dynamo as an example that isn't instrumentation that you might traditionally have had in a managed database that runs on your own host. And so you've got to maybe figure out through a variety of tools that the application that's actually making this downstream request is having trouble because of data I can intuit through a variety of metrics and log data points and maybe a diagnostic tool that AWS provides. So I think taking the data in, connecting it and contextualizing it so that I can navigate through and get to an answer is critical.
So how is the IO Pipes technology going to be built into the New Relic environment then?
Yeah, so we've already done some of it.
Yeah,
right?
So we've already brought over AWS Lambda layers that were developed initially at IO Pipe, as well as a CLI tool to configure your Lambda account or your AWS account for New Relic serverless APM, and to enable the instrumentation on those functions. So we've already done that work and shipped that to our users. And there's additional technologies and assets that we're looking at bringing over as well. There's only so much I can get into with that, but definitely, we've already been bringing over things at a rapid pace.
Yeah, I'll also mention, and you're familiar with New Relic, a lot of our kind of magic comes from the power that is NRDB, the proprietary database we have that stores our raw event data. And so, obviously, IOPipe did not have NRDB, right? So they had a different implementation. So I think in that case, a lot of the conceptual features that they had and kind of the user research they had already done to figure out how people wanted to slice and dice data. You've already seen that. We have a blog post that'll probably come out next week, but the feature's already live, so I can talk about it. It's called Facet Builder, but basically allows you to build these custom charts that allow you to easily create filter sets that break out your, you could have 1 million function invocations and 13 of them fail for a particular customer ID. In 2 clicks, you get down to the 13 failures, and it makes getting to the answer a lot more rapid. They had a lot of similar faceting creations that they had created within IOPipe. They just weren't the same as we had. So understanding the domain, understanding the problem set, lets us take that knowledge and that conceptual IP and transition it into our implementation.
Great. I'd like to spend some time talking a little bit about AWS reInvent, and primarily about a post you wrote this week about how you're introducing provisional concurrency for AWS Lambda. It seems like a good hook for our discussion. And it seems to take into consideration these spikes in workloads that are inevitable, right? And these traffic overloads that can happen. And as you were stating, right, as serverless architecture is the shortest living at the infrastructure, at the infrastructure kind of base of the stack, latency can become a real problem, right? And so I'm just curious can you tell us about this news and what it is and why?
Yeah, I think, we hear from customers all the time, we wish we could use Lambda for certain public-facing APIs, but we have latency SLAs that just don't allow us to have unpredictable cold start penalties of this degree when we have unpredictable traffic. And, to some degree, I think companies they see general traffic curves, and that's why they're even able to set a provision capacity number and don't need it to necessarily auto scale like Dynamo did with capacity auto scaling. But on the flip side, it also enables them to I'll say use languages or frameworks like .NET or Java where a cold start penalty might penalize them more, continue to use the frameworks they care about, and because they have rather predictable traffic, they can essentially guarantee that they'll get warm starts across the container. And if they don't set it high enough, it's not like it breaks, right? So the feature is incredibly well designed. I'm really excited about it. I'm glad we're supporting it from a metrics standpoint. I think that there's a whole new horizon of thinking about how it benefits customers and what we do there around how we can help you understand your traffic patterns. So that, when you're seeing traffic spikes or duration spikes, maybe we can recommend a provisioned concurrency number or something like that. That'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, and I think it's also going to change some of the applications that we're seeing running on Lambda, which will also change what they're observing and how they're monitoring it. Yeah. Like one of the applications I think that provision concurrency will really enable is machine learning on Lambda, because right now one of the challenges is that people have to download those models from somewhere like S3, and it takes a very long time to do those downloads and to unpack those, and that's all done during a cold start step. So having provision concurrency is going to enable a lot of machine learning work on Lambda, and it's something that we see today, but I think that we'll see a lot more of it once provision concurrency is enabling that for them.
I'm curious on the architecture behind it, and and what does this extend from that you're already offering? How did you build it?
Yeah. So the feature itself, built by Lambda, right? So we have an extensive CloudWatch metrics offering where essentially what we do is on your behalf, and we previously talked about. Observability for black boxes involves you grabbing data from a lot of sources. And one of those black box data sources we get data from is CloudWatch. So service teams publish metrics to CloudWatch. We harvest them and then augment the underlying infrastructure or application data that we instrument through our serverless offering or through classic APM with that metric data. So they publish the metrics, we harvest them and make them available for our customers so that they can understand based on the traffic volumes and latency characteristics they're seeing through our instrumentation how they should set provision concurrency to avoid the negative impacts of a cold start.
Is any of the technology from IOPipe built into this, or
not into the provision concurrency stuff? Members of the former IOPipe team definitely worked on this.
Yeah.
But this wasn't. This is a new feature from AWS, So integrating this into NRDB and exposing those metrics to our users didn't depend on any technology we had brought with us, because it was all net new things from AWS.
What are customers asking about at reInvent? What are they asking about serverless? And how are the questions different than last year, for example?
Yeah, I'll say, like, broadly, I see a lot more customers who you wouldn't consider to be on the cutting edge of technology, thinking about serverless as a viable option for their system architectures. We have a customer, it's one of the largest contract manufacturers in the world. They engage AWS professional services and their engineers, and they completely rebuilt their legacy monolith that was entirely on premises and moved it into Lambda entirely. And if you think about manufacturing, it's pretty seasonal. You have shifts and different workload requirements from various machines. It's a natural fit for their APIs. And so we're seeing businesses like that. We're not only seeing the people who are already at the edge, right? You're not just seeing customers who maybe were exploring whether they can run Knative on their Kubernetes cluster and think about event-driven architectures. You're seeing customers who skip the process of migrating to the cloud through lift and shift entirely and just say, hey, I'm going to rebuild this thing with a technology choice that makes sense for my workload.
I see. Interesting. Any observations from your point of view about what customers are asking and how it seems different than before? Are the complexities different? You talked about the complexities that are changing.
Definitely. I think that we have at New Relic we have certain users that have a much larger scale than what we're doing at IOPipe. Definitely many more users. We have a lot of metrics on we know we have people using this product. It's I don't know. It's interesting. It's more users, so I think it's more variety of problems, just because it's just the gross number of users is larger.
It's not what is serverless anymore. It's now I have this problem.
Yeah. That's right.
And I'm trying to resolve it. How can serverless help?
That's right. And some of the things are very clearly applicable to people. They know how they're going to pick it up and use it tomorrow. Provision concurrency is one of those things. You go in the console, you adjust a setting in the AWS console and say, I want to make 15 warm containers available at any time that are going to go execute my code. And it just works. It's just you don't get cold starts anymore. And the RDS connection pooling is probably another one, right? It's a fairly trivial change. AWS even announced, it was about a couple months ago, a lot of improvements around Lambda functions that were in a VPC to reduce cold start things by attaching EINs better. And so those things are customers, they get because they're applicable to them today. And then there are things like Erica alluded to with the step functions express workflows, where I think people say, wow, that's super cool. I'm going to go think about how I could use that. And so, you're going to start seeing people playing with it. We'll start hearing with it more from our customers. I think that's what I see is, and having worked at AWS, I'm pretty everyone loves and complains about the number of things that get announced in the weeks and during reInvent. It's hard for, I think, I worked there and I didn't know everything that was getting launched or couldn't pay attention to it all. Right. It's tough for people. So I think they find the things that are they can immediately know how it works, and then they'll explore the rest.
And something I might add is, so we did this a few months ago. We had an AWS Developer Influencer Summit, which was primarily heroes and community leads working with AWS. And something that came up was Lambda Layers, how this was released last year at reInvent. And several of us in the room had published public layers, which was something that wasn't, AWS didn't stop us from doing that, right? It was made possible because of AIM and permissions and how that works. But, a lot of that product wasn't necessarily designed for making them public and sharing them. There wasn't discovery mechanisms. Versioning, existed, but it's complicated. And there were things that, as publishers of layers, that we wanted, collectively as those of the group of people who are publishing layers, right, in that conversation. And, it was clear that, this was a case where, AWS released new functionality, and then suddenly people started using it and started hitting the edge cases of it and started saying, we need more, right? Like,
Yeah.
thank you for releasing this. Now give us more, please. Like, we need this to be more capable so we can deliver, the things that we want to deliver to our customers.
Great. Well, I want to thank you both for taking the time to talk today.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Andrew Tunnel is a General Manager, Serverless and Emerging Cloud Services at New Relic. Erica Windish is Principal Engineer at New Relic. Thank you both for joining us.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Listen to more episodes of the New Stack Makers at thenewstack.io/podcast. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time. New Relic delivers real-time insights that software-driven businesses need to innovate faster. New Relic makes every aspect of modern software and infrastructure observable so companies can find and fix problems faster, build high-performing DevOps teams, and speed up transformation projects.